I'm 103 years old, and it took me 76 years to learn the one thing that mattered. By the time I understood it, most of my life was already behind me, and the people I should have understood it for were gone. At this age, the days are very quiet. The nurses speak softly around me, as if I might break. My hands tremble when I lift a glass of water. Sometimes I forget where I've put my glasses, and then I remember I'm not reading much anymore anyway. There isn't much left to organize or fix. When you're 103, you don't imagine you'll still be here. You outlive your friends, you outlive your siblings. If you're unlucky, you outlive one of your children. You sit in a chair near a window and watch a world that has no memory of the one you started in. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only aware of it. It stands in the corner of the room like a patient visitor. What unsettles me is not that I am leaving, but that I misunderstood so much while I was here. I thought life was something you built first and lived in later. That was my mistake. I was born in 1923 in a small house with thin walls and a coal stove that never seemed to warm the kitchen properly. My mother kept flour in a tin and saved bits of string in a drawer because you never know. I grew up during hard years. You learned early that security mattered more than comfort. Stability mattered more than pleasure. You didn't waste time asking what made you happy. You asked what would keep you safe. That thinking stayed with me. When I was in my 20s, I married a steady man named Thomas. He worked at the rail yard. He had strong hands and a quiet way of listening that made you feel less foolish for talking. We didn't marry for passion. We married because it made sense. We rented a small house near the tracks. It smelled faintly of oil and metal from the trains, but it was ours. I sewed curtains from discounted fabric. He built shelves in the hallway. In the evenings, we sat at the kitchen table with tea and planned our future like it was a structure we could design. We agreed on one thing: we would not struggle the way our parents did. So we worked. I took a job as a bookkeeper at a manufacturing office. I was good with numbers. I liked the order of them. They behaved. If you did the math correctly, they gave you the right answer. People are not like that. We had 2 children, a girl first, then a boy, 3 years later. I remember holding my daughter in the hospital and feeling something enormous and frightening open inside me. Love like that makes you vulnerable in a way nothing else does. I promised myself I would give her everything. What I meant by everything was opportunity, education, a stable home, clean clothes, piano lessons. I did not mean time. I didn't realize that's what she would remember. When she was 5, I went back to work full time. It seemed practical. Thomas's wages were steady but modest. If we saved carefully, we could move to a better neighborhood, a larger yard, better schools. So I left early each morning. I told myself she wouldn't remember these years clearly. I remember them. Her small hand slipping out of mine at the daycare door. The way she looked back once before the teacher let her inside. I told myself she would understand one day. That became a habit. I told myself that about many things. When my son was born, I took less time off than I had with her. There were promotions to consider, responsibilities. I had begun supervising others, and I liked being respected. At work, people listened when I spoke. At home, there was always noise, spilled milk, arguments over toys, laundry that multiplied overnight. I convinced myself I was doing this for them, and I was, in a way, but I was also doing it for the quiet pride I felt when my name was mentioned in meetings, for the satisfaction of balancing accounts perfectly, for the approval of men who had once dismissed me. I didn't see the trade I was making. The years moved quickly. They always do, and when you're measuring them in pay raises and report deadlines, there were school plays I arrived late to. I remember slipping into the back row while other mothers were already seated, their coats folded neatly beside them. There were dinners where I said, "Just a minute," and that minute stretched long enough for a child to stop asking. I did attend some things. I was not absent. I was simply divided, and division is quieter than absence. It doesn't announce itself. Thomas used to say gently, "You don't have to carry all of it." I would answer, "Someone has to." He stopped arguing after a while. We bought the bigger house. It had a maple tree in the yard. I remember standing at the kitchen sink the first night, looking out at that tree, feeling triumphant. I thought, this is what it was all for. But the children were older by then. They had their own friends, their own secrets, their own ways of closing their bedroom doors. I had secured the house. I had not secured the closeness. There wasn't a single moment where it broke. That's the part people misunderstand about regret. It doesn't explode, it erodes. My daughter stopped telling me small things first, then medium things. By the time I noticed, she was only telling me the necessary things. My son grew quiet in a different way. He became agreeable, easy. Teachers said he was independent. I thought that was a compliment. It wasn't until much later that I understood independence can sometimes mean you learned not to expect help. Thomas retired at 65. I worked another 6 years. I told myself it was sensible. We could travel. We could enjoy it later. Later is a very persuasive word. In those years, Thomas would sit in the living room in the afternoons, reading the newspaper. When I came home, he would look up as if he had been waiting for the sound of my key in the door. I was often too tired to notice the way he folded the paper and set it aside. He died at 74. A heart attack in the early morning? It was quick, they said. There is nothing quick about standing in a hospital hallway with a plastic chair against your legs, realizing the person who has shared your life for 50 years is gone. The house was very quiet after that. I had all the security we had worked for. The paid-off mortgage, the savings account, the tidy investments. I would have traded it without hesitation for one more ordinary evening at that kitchen table. That was when I first felt it clearly. Not guilt, not exactly. An awareness. I had been preparing for a future that arrived without the people I meant to enjoy it with. My daughter had moved to another state by then. We spoke on the phone every Sunday. The conversations were polite, affectionate even, but they skimmed the surface. She had learned to keep her deeper worries to herself. My son visited more often. He fixed small things around the house. He asked if I needed groceries. We spoke about practical matters. One afternoon when I was 76, my daughter told me she had been offered a job overseas. She sounded excited. My first instinct was to say, "That's so far?" Instead, I said, "You should go." And I meant it. But after we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and realized I did not truly know the woman she had become. I knew her resume. I did not know her heart. That was the year it finally settled into me. 76 years old. I had spent decades believing love was proven through provision, through endurance, through keeping everything from falling apart. But love is also time. It is attention without impatience. It is being interruptible. I had been efficient. I had not been interruptible. My son was diagnosed with cancer 5 years later. There are certain phone calls that divide your life into before and after. That was one. I sat on my bed holding the receiver, listening to him explain it calmly, as if he were discussing a faulty appliance. He said, "It's early. They're hopeful." I heard the fear underneath. I flew out to stay with him during treatment. For the first time in his life, I had nothing else scheduled. I sat in hospital rooms and watched the slow drip of medication into his veins. I held his hand. I listened when he spoke about things he had never told me. He said once, very quietly, "I didn't want to bother you when I was younger. You always seemed so busy." He wasn't accusing me. That made it worse. He survived for 3 years. We talked more in those 3 years than we had in the previous 30, but illness compresses time. It does not expand it. When he died, I was 84. No parent expects to bury a child, even at my age. There is a particular silence that follows that kind of loss. It is not dramatic. It is steady and permanent. After the funeral, people returned to their routines. I returned to mine. But there was a chair at my kitchen table that would never be filled again. I began to go through old boxes in the attic, report cards, drawings, letters. I found a crayon picture my daughter had drawn when she was 6. It showed a small figure labeled me and a taller figure labeled Mommy standing beside a building with square windows. The building was larger than the house. I understood immediately. She had drawn my office. Even in her picture of us together, I was at work. I sat on the attic floor and held that paper in my hands for a long time. You cannot go back and sit on the daycare floor. You cannot reappear at the school play on time. You cannot rerun an ordinary Tuesday evening and choose to close the ledger instead of finishing it. Time does not negotiate. That is what it took me 76 years to learn. Not that work is wrong, not that providing is foolish, but that postponing presence is a quiet gamble, and the house usually wins. I am not telling you to abandon your responsibilities. I am not telling you to live recklessly. I am telling you that the people who sit across from you at the dinner table are not permanent fixtures. They are passing through. So are you. I used to think there would be a season for closeness later, after the mortgage, after the promotion, after retirement. Later arrived. It was quieter than I expected. My daughter visits when she can. She brings photographs of grandchildren who call me great-grandma in voices that sound like distant music. I am grateful for them. Gratitude and sorrow can sit in the same chair. I have learned that too. At 103, my world is smaller. A bed, a chair, a window. Sometimes I close my eyes and try to remember the exact sound of Thomas's laughter. It comes to me faintly, like something heard through a wall. I try to recall my son's voice as a boy, before it deepened. I can almost reach it. Memories fade at the edges first. If you are still in the middle of your life, you probably believe you have more time than you do. I did. I believed I could delay tenderness. I believed love would wait politely while I finished my work. It doesn't. If I could sit at that old kitchen table again, with the noise and the spilled milk and the unfinished tasks, I would leave more things undone. I would let the dishes sit. I would arrive early and sit in the front row. I would ask one more question and wait for the full answer, not because it would change the ending. The ending comes for all of us, but because it would change the texture of the years in between. Now, as I sit near this window, watching light move slowly across the floor, I understand that a life is not measured by what you secured. It is measured by what you were present for. I was present for many things, but not enough of the right ones. That is not a dramatic statement. It is simply true. I don't expect redemption at 103. I don't expect to fix what is already past. I speak because there is very little left for me to do except tell the truth as I see it. You will make your own choices. You will justify them the way I justified mine. Just remember that later is a promise no one signed. The people you love are aging even as you plan. So are you. I have had a long life, longer than most. It was not empty. It was not without joy. But if I am honest, the sharpest memories are not of promotions or houses or balanced accounts. They are of small hands slipping from mine, of a folded newspaper set quietly aside, of a hospital room where time felt both too fast and too slow. At 103, I am not trying to inspire you. I am simply telling you what it took me 76 years to understand. Presence is not something you schedule for later. It is either given now or it is lost. The light is fading outside my window. Soon someone will come in and help me to bed. There are not many evenings left. If you still have yours, sit in them fully. That is all. I learned it late. I hope you don't.